the Cartesian duality of mind-body difference. Because obviously we are sensate people with senses. The first people I got to befriend at Eric's was a gay couple called Julian and Jill, and they looked like really cool indie girls. Kisses fly. Can we kisses fly? We absorb what is around us, but we also have the capacity to think as well. And for me, my art form is a blend by now of the purely phenomenological, the instinct where I can literally hear someone's voice and my hand goes to somewhere on the guitar neck and
Hello everyone, this is W, host of the High Art on the Edge page, host of Surprise Cast. Today in Surprise Cast Studio, we have a musician that I've been very fond of over the years. His work, his collaborations. We're going to get into all of this very soon. His name is Jem Kelly. Welcome to Surprise Cast, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. I'm keeping myself fit and active so far as the guitar playing is concerned. And also I'm a keen cyclist. So where I live in Brighton, UK, has some wonderful hills nearby that I can go and break out a sweat upon.
Jem, do you think about the past often? And if so, what do you think about?
Yes, because at the end of the period with the Wild Swans, we'd recorded an album called Bringing Home the Ashes. And yeah, this was an album to which I'd devoted quite a lot of time, effort, and focus. And it was important to try and get the balance right between a stripped down version of the Wild Swans Mark I, which is what Paul's brief to me was. He said he'd like it to sound more like Bruce Springsteen, which to me, I was like, well, yeah, Bruce Springsteen's great, but we're from Liverpool and how's that going to work? So I kind of interpreted that approach to try and make things a little bit more straightforward and I'd say rocky in a kind of television, the band way. So at the end of all this, I knew we had a hit album without a doubt. Sire Records knew we had a hit album without a doubt. They were screaming at us to get managers.
Yep.
We met, they introduced us and wanted us to be managed by a person called Gary Carefirst, who managed Madonna and the Talking Heads. And he was ready to set us out on a tour of the US and the world, supporting whoever we wanted. Money, no object. And I was like, wow, this is great.
Yeah.
One of my bandmates, nope, they're too big. Too big. They'll just swallow us up and nothing will happen. Right, okay. This is after we'd already ditched a manager I found who'd been a tour promoter of a French tour with the Lotus Eaters called Luc Vergier. And he'd got us the deal with Sire basically because he went to see Seymour Stein and was in negotiations with him. And he was a phenomenal person, this Luc Vergier. But the singer, Paul, he said, no, we can't have him. He's too small, doesn't know what he's doing. He's French. And I was like, oh, what? So what? Seymour Stein employed him because Seymour Stein knew he was brilliant. And then he discovered, this is Luc Vergier, when he went to work in LA for Sire, he discovered this band who'd been signed to Sire for a couple of years. Nobody knew what to do with this band except Luc Vergier. And he goes to Seymour and he goes, Seymour, this band is brilliant. What's happening with them? Please, let me have a go at breaking this band. They are fantastic. Which band are you talking about? Well, the Fugees, of course. These are brilliant. So there's two managers who weren't good enough. But there's a third manager. So Seymour introduced me because I was the kind of person going around trying to get this on the road. We've put in effort, time, creative sensibility. Paul's lyric vocals are brilliant on the album. It's a distillation of what he'd been doing with the earlier Wild Swans. We got introduced to this guy, and he said, look, music management, it's not rocket science, Sorry to use the hoary old cliche, but I'm going to get you out on a tour to promote the album in the UK with Mighty Lemon Drops. You'll be supporting them in the UK, but that's fine. When you go to the States, we can go with a much bigger band. All you have to do is it'll be like clockwork, do by numbers, you'll go touring, you'll build up your first audiences, and you're going to break this album. Guaranteed. I can guarantee it to you. And I was sitting there, and, part of me is thinking well, no one can guarantee anything in this crazy business, but
right.
No, he's a good bloke, this, and he's down to earth. He comes from a working class Northern England background, same as us. What could go wrong? So we went on tour in the UK with the Mighty Lemon Drops.
Yep.
In fact, they became good friends. David Newton, I'm still in touch. Paul Marsh, still in touch with them. Then we need to address the States. And then comes, Paul again. We can't work with him. Why not? He's going ahead. Everything's going according to plan. What's wrong? Well, have you seen him? He's baldy and he wears this leather flying jacket. And I was like, yeah, but that doesn't matter. He's brilliant. He's doing the job. We don't need anything more than this. So again, it had to be me. I had to tell Luc Vergier, I'm very sorry, even though I think you're brilliant. We can't, we've decided to go with someone else, which we hadn't at that time. Then Marcus Russell went on to manage Oasis. Not just manage them, he broke them from nothing. Nobody knew who they were or anything. And I just thought, there's somebody who doesn't really want to be doing this. In the end, we were in a studio in Liverpool, and there was a really great bloke who was the man on the ground in the States called Howie Klein. He was the label manager back then. And Seymour Stein was, the CEO and stuff. And I used to see Seymour in London and stuff with the rest of the band. And we were on, good terms with him. He was ready for it all to be green lighted. And we had to do this thing which became Music and Talk from Liverpool. And on the day we were in the studio, this was, Paul's cousin, who was the engineer. He was a lovely lad. Kevin, sadly no longer with us. Paul was there, and Joe, who was the bass player, turned up late. So when he turned up, he was hungover and couldn't do it. And then Paul decided he wasn't going to do it either. And I said, look, we've got an album that they bankrolled. We've got a second album to come, which I'd made a point, you see, of signing a 2-album contract. That is, usually record labels have the option of doing a second album, but they give themselves the option, if you're successful, of having 7 albums with you see. So I, having had a record deal with the Lotus Eaters before, I knew that we could get a 2-album fixed deal, because that had occurred to me back then. And that we could do it for 4 albums, so that if it was a success, we'd have to be, we could renegotiate on album 4 kind of thing. So anyway, what happened was I ended up, being asked to leave the band over some inflated charge of something. And I just thought at that point, I've had enough. I can't really rely on other people in music. It's too crazy. That's a crazy lifestyle, to be codependent with someone who suddenly decides, I can't do that.
You nailed it, because what you did, you took me on a full lap there.
I did.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. And we'll go a little bit more, if you don't mind, a little bit later into some of the Wild Swan stuff. But with regards to cycling, how did you get into that? Because that is such a dangerous, I know, exhilarating sport.
Mm.
But what does it do for you?
Okay, well, what it did for me, it was my salvation after leaving the world where you're touring. I mean, not that there was much touring with the Wild Swans, but there should have been more. But anyway, leaving that kind of like high pressure environment, I needed something to fill that. And what filled the void were two things. One was to go back to college and do some studying, which basically I just wanted to do English literature because it was the only subject basically I was any good at school. Then the other thing was cycling. And I'd actually, as early as about 1985, I'd gone on a tour in France with the Lotus Eaters, and we were in one of those great big, all-in-one coaches kind of thing that you can sleep on if you need to. And I took a bicycle with me, so I was actually cycling round by day and then getting on stage, in the afternoon to sound check and doing the gig. So I was kind of like leading a double life there. One as a
Yeah.
kind of Tour de France cyclist almost. I mean, I wasn't doing big mileage. I mean, it was only like 40, 50K, per day kind of thing. But I mean, there was one time where I got to the venue like about 5 minutes after the coach and they'd been stuck in a traffic jam. And I'd cycled all along the coast from Monton up into Carlo and across to Nice. So cycling was a challenge and one that I really got stuck into. I've got a photo somewhere in the living room where I'd won some trophies, for hill climb, road race, and track as well. I was good on the track, and I was bizarre. I was somehow able to do this despite having had all the years where people would be getting their best, out of them. I was able to step into it round about 88, 89 and get good really, really quickly because, I'd never really stopped doing cycling.
So one more question regarding cycling. How does it nourish your soul?
Oh, because that's an easy one because when you're out, you get into a kind of zone, don't you? And for me, my cycling style, if you like, is typified by what you call a high cadence. So, typically I'm between 90 and 110 RPM. I mean, 110 is probably a bit fast, but going downhill, I just twiddle. But yeah, when you're on the flat, you keep up a high cadence and your body gets into this zone. And it's very, there are similarities with playing the guitar actually, because when you get into playing guitar, you're rhythmical, you're using two of your limbs and you really get going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a phenomenological thing. I think it's to do with the body, mind, synergy where you're kind of immersed within something. And music is one way of immersing yourself. Sport is another.
Okay, my friend. Well, thank you for sharing about your cycling history there. For people that are listening, they probably weren't aware of that. So much appreciated. We're going to retrace some steps here and dive a little bit deeper into your childhood. I'm going to read something to you, and I just want to get your response. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
This comes from an actual diary of Taylor Swift. This is a CD deluxe version of her album Lover. And when you buy it, you get some really nice diary entries. And I'm going to read a little passage to you and can't wait for you to respond to it. Here we go. This is what Tay-Tay has to say. Oh, I was such a B word today. When my mom picked me up, she was late again because she thought I had varsity singers. I was nasty to everybody. I tried to practice my songs for Nashville, but I completely psyched myself out and broke down crying. I don't know if I can do this. I want it so bad. I got so scared of what might not happen. When I miss my notes, I dive bomb. The whole thing goes crashing down. I just have to breathe and breathe out and breathe in. Relax. Nashville is not going to kill me. I could handle it. I'm okay. I'll be fine. I'm young. I'm talented. They'll see it in me. I'll be okay. I've got to hang on. Can't worry. I'm only 13. I'm allowed to make mistakes, right? So my question for you, Jem, is this. We just learned a sliver of Taylor Swift and her diary days, being young and what she was thinking. Tell the listeners some memories, some scents, some sights that take you directly back to your childhood days. You could include teenage years as well. Let's go on a little bird walk, yeah?
It's warm in and out.
At that age, that year was quite a seminal year for me because where I grew up, in Liverpool 7, it was an area called Edge Hill. And my mother had lived there in that area, and her parents before her all their lives. And the house where we lived was a terraced house, and it had an outside WC. It had a front parlour which became the bedroom of my sister Margaret. One memory I have from that particular situation is my sister running, screaming into the living room, saying, "Hanson's tried to peep at me through the window." Hanson was the milkman. So, yeah, we had blue plastic vinyl swivel chairs, which were pushed together, not used as swivel chairs, pushed together as a kind of couch type thing. And then we had what we call the back kitchen, which was the actual kitchen where we use for, preparing food. My mum used to leave a frying pan out with lard in. In the morning, you would see, is this the kind of walk you're after? The pitter-patter of the feet of mice through the lard. Upstairs, we had a bathroom which had to be converted into a bedroom for one of my brothers because the two brothers had been sleeping together in the same room and constantly fighting. So I remember one day when I was about 10, there was a knock at the door, and I went, and I can see framed in the door this a person who has two first names as a complete name, like you, called Peter James. So he was there, and he goes, "Oh, hi, Jem. Is your brother James there?" Because people used to knock round, you see, for each other.
Yeah.
And I said, "Yes, he is, but he can't come right now because he's sitting on my brother's head." Because my brother Paul, who taught me how to play the guitar, the rudiments of playing, was the black sheep who was going wild, and my brother James and my dad had to, constrain him at one point. So a little bit different there. I mean, when I moved in that year, when I was 13, we moved bizarrely from a really tiny house that was too small. And it's what I look back on as a slum dwelling. I've got no shame in that. It was just what I was used to a house which had 4 bedrooms, a proper living room with French doors, and a garden, which my mum at least had long wanted a garden. She prayed for a garden because she had green fingers, and so did my dad. But he had an allotment, you see, which was the local city council had allotment. So yeah, what I remember is what one day, be just leading up to the move, I had to go to a bus stop to wait for the bus, and I remember a giant poster on the other side of the road, which was for a Status Quo album called Stormbringer.
Okay.
And I was stood there at this bus stop looking at it and going, "What is that? Stormbringer? Who would call an album Stormbringer? Moving on the edge of the sky," that kind of stuff. So yeah, probably a different thing, you see. And this is, in the UK we have, which you're probably aware of, but I'll just say for the listeners anyway, we have a class system which people pretend doesn't exist, and it totally exists. We had the chance to do away with the class system when we became very briefly, well, you could say it was a dictatorship. I like to think it was the burgeoning of a republic when Charles I was beheaded. You had a change then. The monarchy was gotten rid of. And you were a teacher, weren't you, William? Did you teach English?
I taught reading, writing, science, art.
You'll probably be familiar with Samuel Pepys. So a few years ago, I was on holiday with my family, and it was just in a little tiny English town somewhere. And in the charity shop, I always go in to have a look to see what's in the charity shop. And there was this, looked like a pristine version of the Diaries of Samuel Pepys for like £1.50, which, like $3 or something. It was used, but it was like brand new. So I began reading through this as my daily reading material. And of course, it just made my heart sink, because it revealed everything there is to know about what politics is. It revealed everything there is to know about how flimsy and just such a small change can make a huge difference echoing down the generations. And, it was both exciting, informative, but also a bit depressing, because you just think, well, it's exactly the same now. Pepys's cousin, the Earl of Sandwich, who invented the sandwich because he was a gambler and he wanted to have something to eat. So why don't you just put some bread together with a bit of ham or cheese? He had been pushed up from nothing, because he was related, you see, to Oliver Cromwell. And he'd been pushed up as a lieutenant, then to a general, then to First Lord Admiral. And so he's thinking, well, who can I get, to get a bit of kickback from my family? So yeah. Samuel Pepys, my cousin, I'll get him to be the head of procurement for the Royal Navy. And of course, part of Pepys's diary is he's suddenly going into this world where he's getting bribes. And his cousin had said to him, he said, of course, it's not the salary that's going to make you a rich man, Samuel. It's all the bribes you can get from this. And this was something which wasn't like, what do you mean bribes? I'm an honourable person.
Right.
It was just like, oh, yeah, okay, well, that's good business, isn't it? So, for me, it's apparent. I can't comment on US politics because I'm not there, don't know anything about it. But apart from, the propaganda we get through the media here. So
sure,
you believe that, or Twitter or anything else. But here, the state propaganda suppresses the amount of money, which is, you can go and search this out if you want, the amount of money that MPs are on the take. And, if someone's getting like 1.5 times your salary from one company or from one lobbyist or from one country, you just realize that, well, we're not, this is just a pantomime, isn't it? It's not really a democracy. This is just because to create an illusion that everything's all going okay. There is a meritocracy.
All right. So maybe it is a meritocracy, but what I'd like to know, if you wouldn't mind sharing more about who your parents are. What did they do? Were they very political? Were they active in the community? Did they instill the love of sports?
Right. So this is quite interesting, because my mum, her grandfather had been a headmaster of a school. Her father was a polyglot. What happened was my mum's grandmother was married to a butler for like an aristocratic family over in North Wales. And because they had the fourth son, which was my mother's father, they sent him to be educated by the Jesuits, you see. And so he learnt Latin and Greek. And I found out through a family narrative his level of understanding, because on my mum's side, which is the intellectual side, I've got any possibility for thought probably comes from my mum's side, music from my dad's side. My mum's cousins were the first 4 women to go through Liverpool University after World War II. And my granddad, who spent his life as a clerk on the railways, which is a low down job, for his brain, he went to deliver some milk and bread to one of the students who was studying the classics in Liverpool. And she told me this story when I went to university after my music days, because they lived near the university. So I went to see them, you see, because they were spinsters. None of them ever married, never had any kids to pass on their knowledge to. And she told me about my grandfather going to bring her milk and some bread one night, in the halls of residence. And she said, "Oh, would you like a cup of tea?" And he goes, oh, yes, please. So when she came back with the tea, he was stood at the desk looking at one of the books. And she says, "Oh, that's Latin, Joe." And he read the page, translated it into English. And she was like, I've been there for 2 hours trying to make sense of this. They didn't talk. They were so, how can one put it, constrained by the Catholic faith. You stand when the priest goes in, you stand up when the doctor goes in. You must be humble. You must be humble. So nobody ever knew he could speak Latin or Greek, or to what level. My dad was the same. In 2000, I took him on a road trip, you see, because one of my colleagues where I was working in one of my first posts as teaching, I was coming to the end of that post actually, and his brother had a gîte in France, just not far from Poitiers, but about 40 or 50 kilometers into the countryside. So I took my dad, you see, and we got there. And what was great, I've got it on video somewhere if I can ever get my hard drive repaired to get that, because it's crashed. Oh, I did a little video of him setting off from Ainsdale, north of Liverpool, and saying, "Hey, Dad, we're going on a journey, aren't we? Blah, blah." And then the next one, it cuts to being down in Dover. And I'm videoing him, you see, and I said, "Okay, Dad, what are you thinking about now? Because we've made it down to Dover." And he goes, "It's a wee bit different to the last time I was here." And I was thinking, what's he talking about? And he said, "Well, it was for D-Day +6. I was going in for all battleships." And I was just like, why didn't I think about that?
Yeah.
And then over into France, and I just found a hotel, I didn't bother booking in advance. It was pre the internet, really. I mean, well, the internet existed, but it wasn't something you did back then. And I just thought, we'll just turn up and get anywhere. So I just found this hotel room, got us stuck in there, went to a bistro, and I said, "Look, Dad, I'm just going, to the toilet. See you in a minute, When I came out, he's having a conversation with a woman in her 40s who was coming to ask, what he wanted. I couldn't really. It was like that kind of like level where you can't quite pick out what they're saying, but he could speak French fluently. And I said, "Dad," I said, "why didn't you tell me that you could speak French?" He goes, "Well, you never asked."
Oh,
Yeah. So anyway,
That is absolutely hilarious. So what did you acquire from your mom? What did she instill? What values? What are you appreciative of?
Yeah, so from my mum, I got the love of words. Basically, she helped me when I was in the primary school to write my first essay and stuff because I was struggling. And then she was a writer as well. So I would see her getting letters. She used to write to newspapers, and she had this kind of like common knack of putting words together in such a way that landed in a particular, right people. And so all these editors they'd be publishing, I've got a scrapbook about that thick. And I'm like, what? She wasted her life. She should have been a teacher or something.
Ah, that's too bad. Tell us a little bit more about your dad and how did he support your love of music and anything else you want to share?
My dad, who went into industry, he did something great for me because he knew I was getting into guitar. My brother Paul had taught me how to play the chords. Quite importantly, how to play the E chord, which is just using those three fingers, because then you can use that one as the bar chord. Whereas if you learn to play it like that, it might be more difficult to learn to play a bar chord when you need to. So my dad did something strange. He bought a 3/4 size or scale nylon guitar, which was really easy to play. And he started to try and play this, you see, in the front room of the big house we moved to, because there was only me, mum and dad, and my nearest brother's 9 years older than me, and they'd all flown the coop. So it seemed crazy to go from like a really tight
Right.
little dump of a place to somewhere nice. But anyway, it was okay. So when I heard my dad playing, you see, it actually caused me to think, I can play better than him. I'm sure I can. So I actually picked up his guitar. Then you see, when he walked off and left it, with the door closed, by the way, he wasn't like, hey, Jem, look at this, trying to teach me something. It was just playing it. Then I would go in and start to play. Yeah, clever. Not like me, with Raphael. Killing any joy you might have in the instrument. But
Okay, so in this conversation, what I'm hearing from you, Jem, is the seed has been planted in terms of the inspiration for music, collaborating with people. I want to read to you a passage from a book called Faith, Hope, and Carnage, written by Sean O'Hagan. And it was the Q&A that he did with, of course, the iconic legendary singer Nick Cave after the horrible, tragic accident, loss of his son, Arthur. So Sean says to Nick to go back to Malibu. Throughout this period of intense creativity in the studio, there are obviously people coming and going. Did that not break the flow? Nick says, well, there weren't that many really. Chris Martin was around because we were working in his studio. Now, Chris has a whole different energy entirely. He's a sweet guy and a dear friend of mine, which seems to surprise some people. Obviously, there's a fair amount of daylight between the kinds of music we play, but who fucking cares? I've always been drawn to his generosity of spirit, his engagement with the world. He's a beautiful guy, and we just got on. When we were recording in Chris's studio, he would often appear after he had been working on Coldplay stuff up the road. He just bounded to the studio full of that manic, ecstatic, life-loving spirit of his, and he'd be flying around the studio like a fucking pinball. So here's my question for you, Jem. Nick talks a little bit later about some very soft collaborations that he had with Chris Martin of Coldplay, and Chris would come into the studio and give him advice on some of the songs and what he was hearing. Tell the listeners some collaborations, whether it be Wild Swans, Lotus Eaters, Tom Hingley. How do you view collaboration and anything else you want to share?
okay.
Do you like that process?
Yeah. So it's a very good question, that actually, William, because for me personally, I work best as a collaborator rather than working in isolation. I've got a collaboration with my friend Gerard Quinn, who was in the first Wild Swans. Now, what happened there, you see, back in the early days, I did my very first gig was on the day of the entry races which is Aintree is like a kind of horse racing course that they have outside of Liverpool, where my brother James lives. And with the band Psychomesh, which was my first band that we developed, I was in a taxi going out towards Aintree Racecourse, and I was wondering why it was so busy, and there was many people were walking around as though they were in fancy dress with big fascinators on their hats and stuff like this. And then I realized, oh no, this is really unlucky. It's the Grand National, and everyone's headed in the same direction as where we're going to be rehearsing. So it took what should have taken like a 20 minutes in a taxi cab, took about 90 minutes. And when I got to the place, Rod the Punk, his name was Brian, came running out in slow motion like this, and he goes, stop, we've got a gig. And I was like, oh, okay, do I get out? And he goes, no, keep the taxi. I'll come with you. The band are going to follow down. And he, slammed the door, and he goes, Eric's, please. So we're going back into town to Eric's, this iconic club. The first band I'd seen there was Joy Division on a Thursday night. We thought we were going to see Warsaw Pact, and instead it was this band Joy Division. And I know Will Sargent was there, but there was only about like 20 people there because it was a Thursday night, and only those people had gone to see Warsaw Pact, but it was Joy Division. So anyway, when we got to Eric's that day, I said, "But why do we have to be there now? Is sound check or something?" He goes, "No, there's a matinee gig, and we're on stage at 2:30." I looked at my watch, and it was like 2:00, and I'm like, "Well, we've only got 4 songs. What are we going to do? How long are we playing for? 15 minutes?" He says, no, we've got to go for at least half an hour or we won't get paid. So we were trying to think, what can we do? We'll play one of the songs at half speed, and then that gets about half an hour. So this is my first gig with like 4 songs that we had to stretch out into half an hour somehow. And it was supporting The Cure. So my very first time on stage is supporting The Cure with the bass player who was later to join the Lotus Eaters, which is just kind of like crazy, really, when you think about it. So anyway, the point about collaboration is when I did the 3rd gig with Psychomesh, that was kind of like a big deal. It was in this kind of like basement of a theatre called the Everyman Theatre. And the whole of Zoo Records, which was, Bill Drummond, Dave Balfe, Julian Cope was there with Gary Dwyer from Teardrops. I don't think Mac was there. Will Sargent was there. He was good friends with Paul Simpson, still is. And someone took a photo, and this is a great photo, of Paul standing looking at me on the stage. And at the end of it, he said, "Oh, listen, how would you like to form a band with me?" And I took one look at him and thought, "Oh my God, I've made it!" Yeah, okay. It was crazy because.
So how old were you at that time? 16, 17? And I can't imagine the enthusiasm you felt.
At that time, yeah. That was my 3rd ever gig, and already I was being invited to play, you see, and I'd gone from being not able to play at all, and in the space of like 6 or 7 months, I was getting home at 4:00 after working from 7:30 till 4, clocking off at 4, cycling back home, and then running up to my room to plug the guitar into the amp, and all I had was a battery amp called an Arbiter. I had a great big battery in there. And I just remember one time, and this is a form of collaboration, because there was a bloke who was like a builder who was sick of hearing my guitar, you see, because I was in the front room and you could probably hear it a few doors away. Yeah. And he came round knocking at the door, and my dad answered the door and he goes, "You've got to tell your son to turn his guitar down." My dad just goes, "Oh, what? Oh, what? What did you?" And it was great. So
your dad sounds amazing. What a great story. So I do want to ask you, Jem, whose vision was it? Who kind of got things rolling? the ball started here?
Then on to like collaboration, you see. Now, Paul was really the first person who had a clear idea of where he wanted to go with the music. With the others in Psychomess, that was great. This is actually what I've kind of theorized a little bit about. You have a musical instinct which runs through your veins, and I'm lucky to it was bequeathed to me, but it bypassed my father because he wasn't musical at all. But both of his brothers were outstanding musicians. My Uncle Harry was like a brilliant pianist and also a photographer, which is one of my hobbies. And my Uncle James began life at 14 working down the coal mines and got out of there, started working as an orderly nurse, and then became, years later, then he became the head of nurse education for the whole of Lanarkshire, Scotland. I mean, incredible. He literally talk about an existential rise. He dragged himself up from the pit. And we are talking a pit where you would go down into the pit. You wouldn't be clocking on and clocking off for an 8-hour shift. You'd go down until you had the tonnage, and your food would be sent down into the pit for you. And my granddad was a foreman, you see, to go down and get the tonnage up. And then after 3 or 4 days and nights, they'd have a blow then for 2 or 3 days. And then they'd go back down. And my granddad ended up dying of silicosis, which was the miner's disease where you're breathing in coal dust. So the collaboration with Paul was something which the phenomenological approach, let's say. So what I mean by phenomenology in this sense is to break down the Cartesian duality of mind-body difference. Because obviously we are sensate people with senses. We absorb what is around us, but we also have the capacity to think as well. And for me, my art form is a blend by now of the purely phenomenological, the instinct where I can literally hear someone's voice and my hand goes to somewhere on the guitar neck and the note I strike is what they're singing. I've never understood how that happens, because if you ask me consciously, what are they singing? I just wouldn't know. I can't read music, you see, in that way. But then you've got something which is more kind of, the literary sensibility which Paul had. And one of the reasons why I wanted to go and do a degree in English literature in the end, after I'd finished with, the music, mainstream music stuff, was because, Paul had kind of somehow carried on this quasi-literary approach to his lyric writing, you see. I just thought, he's a fantastic lyricist. There's anything like it. It's so good. And so that collaboration.
Yeah, so that collaboration between you two only seemed to get richer and deeper as you progressed and kind of built a friendship, yeah?
When I walked into, because the first collaboration I had with Paul, it was just me and him, and I was only 17 and he was about, 22 or something. So at that age, it's a huge gap, huge. But he valued my playing, you see. So we tried it out for like best part of 3 months. We'd go every week to where the Teardrop Explodes and Echo and the Bunnymen were rehearsing. We could use all their gear. They were just really great. They just said, especially Will's very generous in that way.
Save me from myself.
But nothing really came of that. So then I went off on my kind of, journeyman musician, playing with people like Mike Head. He went on to be in Pale Fountain Shack, etc. And Yorkie, who was with Space and stuff like this. And doing the rounds until I eventually got the call again, you see, from Paul. Only this time, he had a band assembled, like a keyboard player, drummer and bassist. And I remember going, I had a day release to a technical college on a Thursday, which was in Old Swan. And we were rehearsing in Yorkie's basement, you see. And that was just a short bus journey. So I remember being quite excited, studying for electronics. I'd managed to get myself on this electronics course and waiting for the end of the day. And I had my guitar with me, and the amount of put downs you would get just for having the guitar. It was like brutal. So then, and I was also wearing baggy trousers and stuff and short back and sides. And I remember going down into the basement, and the first person I saw was Jed. I mean, obviously I saw Paul because Paul was, invited me in, and I was pleased to be back, with Paul. But this other person was there, Jed, and I looked across, and he was wearing this kind of like trench coat with a belt round the outside, and he was just stood there with a big happy smile on his face. I was like, what are they doing? This is good. So anyway, they started to say, they said, oh, here's an amp. And I said, oh, yeah, okay, I'll get my guitar out and my floor pedal with a delay or whatever it was. And as I was plugging in, they said, we'll just start playing, and we'll go through it once, then we'll have a chat and then maybe join in for the second go. So they started playing round this thing. And no sooner had I just literally plugged in and literally picked the guitar up, right? And I just went to this. You know that one? Revolutionary Spirit.
Lost in the delta of Venus, lost in a welter of shame. Deep in the forest of evil, we embark on the new crusade. Is this your foolish plea? We have come to banish the land. I stand as Sebastian with love for a heart man. There were hopeless dust, so strange and absolute. Nestling in sweet sorrow is the savior of our youth. All is quiet when her angels fear. Oh, my blood.
So that was within literally, in the amount of time I was telling you about what I'd done, plug in the guitar and pick it. They were on about bar 8 or something, and they just had the guitar right there.
Did you know you had something special in your hands? And what was the reaction from the others?
Well, for me, it just seemed entirely natural. You see, although I did know it was a great sound, of course I did. It was brilliant. But what was funny was the reaction from them. Because although Paul, you see, knew what I was capable of, and he was like that, you see, none of the rest of them had even knew who I was or what I'd been doing. And like Jed, he'd come up with those chords. He was just like, how did you know what to play? They just couldn't understand. It was like, he's just walked straight in and they said, have you been listening to this on a cassette? And I said, no, it's the first time I've heard it. That was the relationship, you see, with Jed on the keyboards.
So what's your relationship like now? Do you guys hang out, play music?
I've started doing music again with him. So I first went down in 2019 because he's a painter now and quite successful one, actually. His paintings are great. So 2019, I went down and we did like 4 tracks, which were okay, quite good in some respects. 2023, I went down with my computer and monitor and stuff and proper setup, and we've just locked right back in. And I was thinking, I don't understand this. How can we just do this? It's not like, with a lot of ideas, I kind of like get ideas on the guitar. If I'm working with somebody, a singer or whatever, I'll say, oh, goes like this and blah blah blah. With Jed, this is the collaboration when it works. With Jed, no discussion about anything. We're not. I'm not saying, oh, I've come up with this or have you come up with that. We can literally just plug and play kind of thing. I just don't know how it works, and it's a pair of us. We've done this one called Sound Reasons. And it is literally, Jed won't even, because he kind of hates having to play to a click track. And we were laughing about this the other day because in the 80s, they just invented computer music and drum machines. So then they'd say like, hey, we've got a Lynn drum machine, cost us about $3,000. We can get you to play to a click track so everyone's in time. Wow, yeah. No, no. Pop, click, pop, Luckily, I can play along to clicks and stuff like that, but Jed just can't. It does his head in. So when we go, we don't use a click track or anything. It just evolves, but it's in time with itself. It's not like out of time or anything. So yeah, it just means there are more nuances to be had, I think. So I think the value of collaboration, when it really dawned on me, see what Paul was doing, it was amazing. We rehearsed in this place called the Ministry. We graduated to the Ministry, and Paul would be in there at every rehearsal, but there'd be no, he'd come in and make interventions to say, yeah, what about this, that, we'd collaborate in that way. We didn't know what he was going to sing. We had no what his lyrics were or anything. There was one point we'd gone, about 6 months in, and then suddenly there was this radio session looming. I said to Jed, do you think he's actually going to be able to come up with anything here? What's going on? And it was only on the day we'd gone down to London. And again, it was another one. We had 2 songs. We had to make up a third to make up the 20-minute playing time. And the third one was a jam, basically, with no lyrics or anything, but sounded pretty good. And that was the John Peel session. One of them was No Bleeding and the other was Enchanted. And we waited until the end for Paul. And there was no guide vocal or anything. It was just us playing what we did in the rehearsal place. And then he put those lyrics and vocal melodies on top, and we were like, "Hey!" So collaboration is strange. It's not necessarily having to think about things,
Yes.
or even negotiate or organize things. Sometimes it can just, and that was the strength. You see, the Wild Swans Mark 1. I doubt I'll ever have that experience again in my lifetime. And I knew what that was. And so did Paul, so did Jed. But, so that's collaboration. And I've had other collaborations as well. But it's about listening and being receptive to each other, of course.
Absolutely. And I also know what is absolute is your experience at this legendary club called Eric's Club in Liverpool. I spoke with Paul Simpson of the Wild Swans and Henry Priestman from the band Chieftains and the Yachts. And I got their take on some of their memories. Bands that used to play there like Sex Pistols, The Runaways, Stranglers, OMD, and so many others. What do you remember about that time period in terms of its cultural identity? What did you feel?
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, for me, I chanced upon going to Eric's really simply through being the guitarist with the band called Psychomesh, and the singer, you see, and the other guitarist, Kenny, used to go to Eric's as, as I mentioned, they were a lot older than me. But I'd say, you see, the amazing thing about Eric's was that it wasn't really to do with Liverpool at all. It was to do with all the bands from the other places who were coming through there. So, yeah, I mean, a band that absolutely blew my mind, and still to this day, that their album blows my mind, was a band called the Pop Group. And there was a record store called Probe Records where, the people who worked in there also went to Eric's and stuff. And I bought this album called Y, which is just the letter Y. And Mark Stewart was the singer, but they looked amazing. But they produced this record which just sounded unlike anything I'd ever heard before. And although that's a kind of, it didn't really influence my own musicianship in a way, it enabled me to acknowledge that there are no limits what music can be. And I still think, like right now, I'm just beginning to find the stranger shores, let's say, of where music can take you and how not to be bound over by convention or even the instrument itself being organized into, frets and notes and all of that. I saw Wayne County and the Electric Chairs. Then 6 months later, Jane County and the Electric Chairs. And the first people I got to befriend at Eric's was a gay couple called Julie and Jill. And they looked like really cool indie girls, lovely looking as well. But I was only 16 and they were friends with the Psychomesh band. The Psychomesh were all a lot older, and Julie and Jill were in the 20s anyway, but they were very much in their own bubble, you see. And I was stood there like totally alone, really, because I was only 16. I was just like Raphael, you try and get a conversation out of someone. So I used to go and sit with them kind of thing. So I think what Eric's did, it made me aware of that gender is a social construct, and that we are bound over by systems of being, communication, from the hegemony, whatever.
Wow.
That Eric's was able to totally deconstruct. And it was only a very small amount of people, it seems to me. The club, even when it was packed, could only get about 150 people or maybe 200 people in. And seeing those bands, I remember one time the Slits were playing and Budgie was the drummer from the Slits, who was also from Liverpool. And he was a friend of Jed Quinn, who was in Wild Swans, who's still my friend along with Paul. But there was this place called the Armadillo, which was jokingly called the Armored Dildo. And I used to go in there, you see, because I'd like to make a day out of going to Eric. So I'd get down there in the afternoon for something to do. But I was very much, again, like a loner. The bands I was in became my social life in a way.
Yes.
So I used to go to the Armadillo, which is where Jed used to work. They do kind of like, chunky brown bread and, Danish blue and stuff and nice coffee. I remember going in there and the only other people sat at this table was the Slits.
Oh, wow.
It's the Slits. There's nobody else there. And like, I got to see them, playing later that night, and Budgie was there and I was able to let on to him because he used to live in the same place as Jed and stuff for briefly before he got off, to London. And I was just thinking that was just the best education you could possibly have, because nothing about the place was normal, really. You'd have to expect the unexpected. And there were people who were into reggae, which was a major theme, ska. Seeing the Selector there was an amazing thing. And the Specials. Adam and the Ants, who I used to laugh at when I'd be like, look at this again, it's pantomime. I went to see them live and I was like, God, they're brilliant. 6 years ago, which was not the last time I did a gig, because I actually did my first gig in 6 years 2 weeks ago in this kind of like cabaret bar in Haywards Heath. That was just something I wanted to do. But 6 years before, I was playing in front of 60,000 people at this festival called Rewind with the Lotus Eaters as part of British Electric Foundation. Adam and the Ants were headlining, you see. Now, everybody else, ABC, Thomas Dolby, he was on the same bill as us. We were all in these kind of like marquee style thing, and there was a place where you could go and get refreshments. You had your own dressing room. Not Adam from Adam and the Ants. He turned up and parked his like massive tour bus right next to the stage so we could walk onto the stage and perform. And I wanted to see, you see, what it was going to sound like. And everybody in his band, they were in their 20s, and he still had the two drummers. And I always thought Marco from Adam and the Ants was a brilliant guitarist and brilliant musician, actually. And when I went to listen out front, I was thinking, this is great. He's never really had the critical acclaim he deserves for this. Okay, on the one hand, you could say, yes, it's pop and all of that, but no, he actually did something. And Malcolm McLaren, who managed him at the time, stole his band off him. You probably know this, to form Bow Wow Wow. And on the bill were, what's her name? What's her name from this?
From Annabella?
Arabella Lewin, yeah. And she was asking me, she said, what are you doing? Have you got any time to play next week? I'm doing some recording. I need a guitar. So I was like, I'd love to do that. But I'm a university lecturer, so sorry. And I just said, that night I was off to Italy with my family, you see. So, but I just thought, look at this. Is it Arabella or Annabella? Annabella Lewin. There she is, lower down the bill. And there's Adam and the Ants headlining the bill. But at one point, McLaren had stolen his band and put her on the front when she was only like 15 or 16. It was strange, really, to see them both still doing stuff, but slightly different level. So, let's come back to Liverpool. All I would say is that when you were in a band, that was like being in a relationship with a certain type of people. You'd have your own
Right.
you'd have your own way of looking and being. The others were looking across at another state or another country almost. There was a definite sense of identity where you had to forge your own identity to the exclusion of everybody else. That's what it was like, really. So although it was, and that was the same in a way, you see, if you think about it, having a different band coming in every single week, just different people. And so it got you, because the programming was so brilliant, you get to see all these different acts. The Cramps. I saw the Cramps. What a band. And you can't, how can you kind of, you're within the kind of like touching distance, like, let's say. I mean, with that band, the Pop Group, when they played, you see, I was in awe of them at age 17, even though I was I'd been in good bands already and done stuff. And in Eric's, there was no door on the changing room. So there wasn't there. It was brilliant. So I went, into the changing room, you see, after the gig. There was this guitarist, John, who I'd wanted to speak to, you see, because he was a guitarist. I was like, great guitar. And look, I love, why didn't you play Snow Girl? And he goes, that was just something, we did in the studio. We couldn't do that live, because they spoke with this kind of like quasi-Jamaican patois, you see, because there was a big Jamaican input that's gone through all the sound of, Bristol, all the way to Massive Attack and beyond, Tricky and all that. And he said to me, hey, do you like mushrooms? And I said, well, I'll be having some with my bacon and egg breakfast tomorrow morning.
Oh, no.
He goes, yeah, you should speak to the drummer, Bruce.
Oh, my God.
4 years later, Rick Rig and Panic had played, and they came out to this club that I was in, and I saw Bruce, and I went up to Bruce. I went, hey, Bruce, like that. And I was in like this, hey, Bruce. And I told him this story, and he looked at me and he goes, oh, man, we didn't do drugs. We didn't do drugs. No, that's in it. And I think he thought I was like some undercover cop or something, because I was too wired and too,
Yes.
And I was like, no. Anyway, what happened was I was meant, just to finish, maybe this could be a good point to pause, actually, but
I think it is a wonderful place to pause. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast feature known as Surprise Cast. And thank you to my guest, Jem Kelly. And yes, there will be part 2 of this conversation. And that episode will be dropped sometime over the summer. Remember this, everyone. Great music is all around us. You just have to keep your ears open. Ciao.